crushed under the weight of many books. So
And the chair is occupied by the dog.
yeah,
So.
yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to World Hoppers. This is a collaborative channel where all of the AdSense revenue and then any profit from merch sales goes to charity. And today we are going to be talking about self-published and indie fantasy. And I have joked that this is selfishly a video where I'm just going to get a bunch of recommendations from both Taylor and Chris, who I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And they're pretty much just going to give you everything you need to know about some indie recommendations. So, Chris, why don't you kick it off? Just some things about you, about your reading tastes, about what your favorite self-published book is, things like that.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris, and you can find me on the channel A Fictional Escapist. I mainly dabble in the sci-fi fantasy sphere, where I try and do a split of about 60-40, where 60% of my reads are indie or self-pub, sometimes going into small press, and then 40% are trad. I also co-own a business called Bard and Butter with my wife, where we do copy editing and proofreading for the indie scene, which is launching later this year. And my favorite indie read is going to be Dreams of the Dying by Nicholas Lietzow, which is a very dark fantasy tale with dream-based magic and an awesome look at mental health representation.
I have that one. I've heard very good things. I still need to read it.
Good.
It scares me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
I will throw my TBR into the sun when the second book comes out.
Yeah, I knew. I was like, oh, if he talks about his favorite, it's gonna be Dreams of the Dying. Yeah. That's how we met each other. I was talking about that.
Yeah. Oh, how fun.
Yeah. My name is Taylor. My channel is Made Between the Pages. You can see below. The reason I kind of got into indie a couple of years ago was I started getting into Spiffbo and eventually became a Spiffbo judge. For those who don't know, it's a self-published fantasy blog off. The ninth version just finished. So we're going to be getting the winner very, very soon. The last numbers are coming out. So after getting kind of involved in that world, I realized how many hidden gems there were in the indie scene, and I kind of never went back. I get a lot of recommendations, though, from people still, because I do think that depending on my mood, my TBR can lean more trad certain times, and it leans more indie others. So I don't have a split exactly like Chris does, but I kind of view them as the same. I don't really differentiate between the two on my TBR specifically. So I do have a lot of favorites from the indie scene, and I can't wait to talk about them today.
Yay. Would you say that do you find that with, people talk about there being so many hidden gems, like you were just saying, in self-pub, do you think, because I love looking at trends and obviously traditional publishing goes often where the money is, do you think part of what makes them hidden gems is the fact that a lot of self-pub authors are just genuinely writing the stories they want to write and there's no outside interference trying to push something out at people?
Oh, 100%.
Either of you. Sorry.
I could see Chris nodding. I could see Chris nodding as well. I definitely think so. Indie books can go places that trad wouldn't consider marketable. And it allows a lot of stories to have a fresh feel to them. And I think that it also allows the authors to say exactly what they want to the way that they want to. So there's some different things people do with prose, different points of view that, trad might shy away from. So I definitely think that that's a big point. I don't know if Chris has anything to add, but.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about indie is that the creative liberty that these authors have just to put out exactly what they wanted to without any of those restrictions. Like we just saw the article from Peter McLean come out saying that TradPub are sort of restricting word counts on fantasy authors right now, where he has been told that his next book is only allowed to be 100,000 words. We're fantasy readers. 100,000 words.
That's
like, what is that?
Not that much. That's exactly. Not that
much. So these authors get to just do what they want.
Go wild. I wonder if, because we're starting to see a lot of success with not just the standalone, but we're seeing a lot more novellas and short stories, and then books that aren't quite short enough to be considered that, but they're barely above, where a lot of readers are like, wait, is this a novella or is this technically a full-length novel? And even though I love T. Kingfisher, I wonder if that's sort of a trend now also, because T. Kingfisher gets books out really fast. And she ends up writing for so many different genres. And I feel like there's a lot of success just from the fact that she keeps having something come out. And I wonder if that's part of it, if they're trying to restrict in that sense, or if they think people don't have the bandwidth. They think we're too impatient. But like you said, a lot of us are fantasy readers. We certainly don't mind the time sink. Do you think the reverse can be true, that sometimes you have to dig a little bit because indie writers might gravitate toward trends, or maybe if they're really finding their start in fan fiction, they might write something that seems almost too familiar? Do you find that sometimes that's the case too?
I think that those books definitely exist, but I think the cause for digging is more with the plethora of choice that you have. There's just so much that in order to find what works with you, then you do have to dig, which I can see a lot of people finding daunting, which is why I think like episodes like this or discussions like this are really important to give people a place to start, because there are some people who want that familiarity when they're starting something new. Like, so I do think that those kinds of books may be exactly what someone's looking for, but they need to be able to find them. And there's just so much self-pub out there, especially with just the accessibility that we have with Kindle Unlimited. There's just so much out there that it's hard to know where to start. So for me personally, when I started, I was lucky to have friends that were already in it and could give me some recs, so I didn't feel so lost.
I sort of read anything and everything these days. After starting sort of alpha and beta reading, my tastes or my comfort zone has really expanded since then. So I do see trends within indie as well as trad pub. Like at the moment, we're seeing a lot of romantasy come out because that seems to be where the trad pub trend is happening. So there's a few authors who are trying their hand at that subgenre to follow that trend along. And also literary RPGs have really taken off over the last couple of years. So we're seeing a lot of that, and that tends to go down the road of Royal Road, which is an online platform, and then they tend to go on to things like Kindle Unlimited, where people can read them for the subscription. But they're probably the two trends that I've noticed.
So on that note,
Cradle
that's actually
took off, right? I'm sorry.
Cradle, yeah.
I didn't mean to cut
No,
you
yeah.
there. Yeah, that's a lit RPG. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I have another channel that I do talk about video games, manga, comics, other things besides just books. And I always in my mind think, oh, there's definitely a lot of overlap here between gamers and fantasy readers. And there's not as much as you would think. So I wonder if some of those individuals that in my mind should exist, I wonder if they're gravitating towards the lit RPG subgenre because they know that that's where they're going to get more of that video game feel. But I still am always like, I swear a lot of us would like these sorts of things. So Taylor, because you were talking about, what's a good place to start? This could be anything, and we'll get into more specifics. If you like this, try that. But do you have any just very generic, you feel like this is a good place to start recommendations? Chris is just picking up a pile.
There's so many books here at the moment. They're everywhere.
He's so prepared. I love it. I didn't prepare any physical representation, even though I do have some. So that was a miss on my part. My bad. But there are a couple that I would say are general good starting points. But of course, I'm going to put the caveat of like, if you like this kind of vibe, maybe you'll like this, just because I have a hard time doing a blanket recommendation. But Murder at Spindle Manor is one that I read for SPIFBO 9. It's a SPIFBO 9 finalist. And it's kind of, cozy fantasy. If you like cozy fantasy, if you like a cozy vibe, then this would be a good place to start because it starts that way. But it's actually a murder mystery with a fantastical element brought in. It's like a locked room murder mystery. And the author does such a good job of expanding beyond that and making you want to see more of the world once the mystery is over. It's going to be a series.
I like that. Is this the one?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it, by Morgan Stang. Yep. I was fighting so hard for this to be the winner. I gave it the best score that I could. We'll see. I know that it's putting up a good fight against a couple other well-deserved books, but this was my personal favorite from the finalist batch this year. I just think it's so well written, and it's easy. It's so easy to get into and jump into. I couldn't put it down for the life of me. So I think if you like those vibes, then that's a great place to start. If you are epic fantasy all the way and you like to feel like kind of at home in kind of the farm boy vibe to begin with, and then it'll change up, I would recommend The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. This is huge. Okay, so if it's a massive series, it has a huge following, and rightfully so. The first book is very cozy in the sense that you know where you are as an epic fantasy reader. You're like, I know this. And then the fun part is that after that first book, it really takes off. I just read the novella The Fall, and I'm obsessed. So I highly recommend this one as a good starting point for that. And then, well, I guess I'll just start with those two because we'll get into more specifics if you like this genre than that one. But for general fantasy readers, if you want something a little more epic in scale or you want something a little tighter, those are two recommendations that I would have as starting points.
Those are good as far as the range, too, of the sort of extremes of subgenre and level of coziness.
Yes. Yes. I think so.
I really
right,
had
Chris,
to
let's
curve
do it.
my list down. So I have one author, but two series to potentially get into because I think she's fantastic. If you are looking to get into indie fantasy, but if you need something a little bit gentler, so more high fantasy rather than epic in scale, that's going to be The World of Lunaria by L.L. McRae, starting with Marauder. So this book has, I would say she's a Mary Sue. It was probably my least favorite part of the book, but it is a multi-POV. We have a multi-character story here that really does build with each book. So each book is based around a different character. There's 6 books in the series, 4 are currently out, and it's a very gentle introduction to a high fantasy world, but it's got a hell of a lot of dragons in there. And the dragon, if you like dragons and you like that sort of entry fantasy that builds with the series, you're going to have a good time with this. If you're looking for more epic fantasy, again with dragons, because Lauren loves dragons, The Iron Crown is a fantastic place to start. So this is the Broken Binding edition.
I was gonna say I've seen the
Yeah,
Broken Bindings. Yeah.
So yeah, she's really, really good starting point. So if you're looking for sort of a gentler intro, World of Lunaria, if you're going straight epic, Iron Crown, really interesting takes on dragons and their magic.
I want to throw
Nice.
out Bound and the Broken has dragons too. Lots of dragons. So
So everything has dragons.
They're such a staple. It's interesting. I almost feel like traditional publishing has sort of steered away from dragon fantasy over the years. I think it used to be such a staple and almost a cliche to have dragons in your fantasy that they've stepped away from that. And same way that vampires for a long time nobody wanted to touch vampires, and then now I feel like vampires are slowly being reintroduced. And now we're getting a lot of them. I'm waiting for the day that Fae, everybody's decided they are tired of Fae, because I feel like that day is coming soon.
No one can spell
But
it. There's so many
wait, how do you
different spells.
spell? How would
I
you
would
spell?
go FAE would be my spelling,
Yeah.
same.
but I've seen about.
So I guess we're all in agreement.
I'm trying to. Well, how else do people spell it? Am I stupid? How else do people spell Fae?
FAY, FEI. I've seen a few.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes
I
sense.
could see FEY working too. Mm-hmm.
Every time I type in the book name Encyclopedia of Fairies, encyclopedia is not spelled the usual, and then I'm so used to Fae that I'm like, it's fairies. And I just always think I'm like, wait, and then I feel like I don't remember how to spell any of those words anymore whenever I'm trying to find that title of that book. So getting into more specific recommendations, and Chris actually came up with a lot of the prompts. So do you want to start, since you're the one that's got the stacks of books everywhere? Is there a stack you'd like to clear as soon as possible?
It's let's go video games, because I feel like a lot of readers are also gamers, and trying to not look at the lit RPG. So I tried to challenge myself, although there is a fun series called The Systems Apocalypse by Tao Wong, and he wrote one called Town Under, which is set in Australia. So he really so people are scared of Australian wildlife, and he just took that and ran with it, and it was a lot of fun. But there was a lot of stats that happened in that book. But if we're looking outside of lit RPG, if you are someone who likes Tomb Raider or Horizon Zero Dawn, you are going to be picking up The Last Ranger by J.D.
Oh, okay.
Entwistle.
That's
So
definitely.
this
I feel like that's
book-
right for me. Sorry.
I've tried to tailor these to you. You wanted recommendations. It's all for you. So this book is very sort of adventure. Something bad happens, as it tends to do at the beginning of fantasy books, and the ranger has to go into the Titan wilds. And the Titans are creatures that she has the ability to sense, and they're awesome. Also, the artwork in this book is next level. Felix Ortiz did a great job in it. So if you like those, that's going to be something you would like to pick up. The next one I'm going for is The Ghost of Tsushima. So the easy answer for this one is going to be sort of Kaigen. So I tried to go a little bit left of field, and I'm going to recommend Sister Samurai. This is by Tatiana Obe, and this is just a badass mama bear who wants to get home to her kids and has to go demon hunting along the way. And it's got that sort of military-esque style fighting. She has 2 katanas or 2 swords on her back. I can't say the name because it's a family-friendly channel, but one is called F Round and the other one is called Find Out. So that is a lot of fun. It's also really short, super fun, had a great time with it. And the last recommendation I've got is if you like The Witcher, that's going to be Curse the Fallen by H.C. Newell. This book feels like Skyrim and The Witcher had a baby. There are so many quests. There is one main storyline which is just insane. It's very sort of dark but easy to follow along with, and you're going to hate one of the characters, and we all love to hate a character. I ranted at her so much with one of the characters in this book, but they're going to be my recommendations for games.
It's very difficult to not make like oohs and ahs as you're talking. I'm just like, oh, about everything you're saying. So I'm like, don't interrupt. Taylor, do you have any for specifically for games?
Yeah, I've got one actually. And I wrote down the ones that Chris mentioned because I've had all of those on my peripheral TBR. You know, that one that we always have for so long. So now it's nice to see them like specifically recommended. yeah, it's never going to happen, but I can do my best. But for me, I have one that I would recommend. It's more of a middle grade vibe, but it's if you like Pokemon, then I highly recommend On Lavender Tides.
I was hoping you would say this one.
Yeah, On Lavender Tides by Travis. On Lavender Tides. I should have prepared visuals. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. No big deal. I just want to make sure I hear correctly so I can show the
by Travis M. Riddle. This book is so fun. It wears its inspiration on its sleeve, but there are a bunch of really interesting twists to what the basis is, which is clearly Pokemon. But the way that the main character is able to catch different creatures is very interesting. They also do have battles, but it's more visceral is the wrong word. There's not viscera everywhere, but they actually do show the battle. So it's kind of fun to see it from that personal perspective, whereas from the game, you don't quite get that. So I would highly recommend this one if you want something fun to pick up.
Yay. Those are all great recommendations. And Chris, good job tailoring to me because all of those, I was like, oh, I do love that. We'll go for also, if you like this popular book or series, what would you recommend if you have any? Because I think for a lot of people, that's where they're already at. They're already book fans. And so if they like this one thing, what then would you recommend? And I'll let you, Taylor, kick this one off.
Well, see, I appreciate that, but I did more genre-based recommendations. I'm trying to think. I know that there's probably a one-to-one, but I don't have that particular setup done. So why don't, if you have specific one-to-ones, why don't you do that? And then I'll do the genre, like go towards genre a little bit more. Does that work?
Yep.
That'll definitely.
I have like 6 pages of notes, so, you know. I'm too prepped for this. So, Mistborn fans. If you are a Brando Sando fan, I would highly recommend Threadlight. This is by Zach Argyle, probably one of the more well-known indie authors out there. This is his special edition that came out on Kickstarter. Artwork is just fantastic. Very inspired by Brandon Sanderson, but this is also super easy to get into. It's a family, very strong family vibes. If you like that found family, we've got animal companions in there as well, which is really fun. But the magic system reminds me a lot of Allomancy. Is that what it's called in Mistborn? I
Yeah.
can't remember. But it reminds me very much of the Mistborn magic system and the writing style. Sorry, Elle.
Similar. I was gonna say, isn't
Yeah.
there even a push and pull used? Am I
Yeah.
remembering correctly? Yeah.
Yeah, with different like colors. We've got emerald and sapphire, and then it gets broader than that as we go through. I will go something that most people will know, and that's going to be Game of Thrones. So if you are a Game of Thrones fan, either the book series or the TV show, I would recommend The Price of Power by Michael Michelle. This is probably one of the indie books that has impressed me the most. As someone who isn't a rereader, I've read this 3 times, and I am very much looking forward to the second book coming out. I have found something new in this book every time I've read it, which is just
That's the
awesome.
best.
But the complexities of the character, the moral grayness of the characters, there's one character in here who I'm pretty sure is going to turn bad, and I don't want it to happen. But I'm very invested. But yeah, if you like Game of Thrones, either the book or the TV series, then I would give this one a go. Now, for something a little bit left of field, for the Canadians, and I'm going to show my age a little bit here, who liked Lost Girl. So this is a very queer normative world. It's quite dark, quite fantasy, lots of people who are, lots of characters in this world. I'm going to recommend an Australian author. This is Jessica A. McMinn with The Ruptured Sky. So we've got a queer normative world, a lot of young people just really trying to find themselves in this book, but it's one of those books that gets bigger and broader the more it goes on. So there's a good learning curve in this one, and the magic is insane. So if you like magic, then you'll enjoy this one.
I'm very excited about all of these. I feel like I can just feel my bank account just trickling down because I've been so good about not buying books as much and using the library, but indie books are often not at the library. So I feel like I'm just gonna have to take the hit. But hey, I feel like probably not gonna be a bad thing. Do you know if these have audiobooks as well? Any of the ones you've mentioned?
Threadlight definitely does, and Adam Gold is such a good narrator, except I do use him to cure insomnia. He's very dulcet and deep and pleasant to listen to.
And
There
then
is also...
did you
Oh, I'm sorry. Just while we were on the subject
no.
of Threadlight and ebooks, I wanted to say that Zach Argyle, the author of Threadlight, did make an indie audiobook channel. Oh, I don't remember the name. It's people volunteer to put their books up there, indie authors, their audiobooks, and it's free. And I think the proceeds are similarly, they go to either charity or the indie fund that Argyle runs as well. When I'm not answering a question, I'll do my due diligence and then tell you what it is so we can put it in the description down below. But I do know that there's quite a library on there now, and all volunteered by the authors. So
that's awesome. I don't think I should have realized that, because I knew about I see there's so many people to try to make sure you keep up with and everything. So I've seen a lot about that book, but I didn't realize about that channel. So that's really helpful. And man,
like I said, I'll make sure I get it down there for you guys.
Audiobooks, for anybody that doesn't know, are so expensive to have done. So expensive. So I know, because I love listening to audiobooks and I love immersion reading. And I know other people who are in that camp sometimes wonder, why don't more self-pub authors get audiobooks done? So if anybody's wondering, it is so expensive, an arm and a leg for it to get done. So be patient. Sometimes it takes indie authors, if they even get the opportunity to have one done, it's really a big investment for them. So just throwing that out there. Anyway, so you said you had more genre recommendations. If you want to give some more.
Yes, genre or like tropes that you enjoy or storytelling styles that you enjoy kind of went broader. But for me, I would say if you like political fantasy, that you need to read A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stewart. I have these. Wait a minute. You got it. Okay. Here's mine in the corner. The first three. You got it. A Drowned Kingdom is the premise is what if Atlantis was real? And then when Atlantis drowns, the displaced society from there, where would they go? What would they do? But it's told from a very unique point of view, where the prince of that kingdom who survives, this is not spoilers, this is all in like the first chapter. The prince that survives is not a very good person. And you follow from his point of view. So all of the bigotry you can imagine, all the isms, he has them. And so he has a very distinct vision of what he's going to do with his society. And obviously things go awry. But it's very political based, lots of backstabbing, lots of intricate details. So if you like that, highly recommend it. The battle scenes are also really good. And there's, usually one or two big ones. So if you're not a huge battle scene person, it won't overtake the pages, but they are really well written when they do show up. So I highly recommend that. If you're coming from horror, I dabble, okay? I'm not a horror genre, queen, but I do dabble sometimes. So I have a couple recommendations. One of those is going to be Nightmare Land. I have that. Oh, I'm so excited.
I keep getting ready to type it in.
It's right here. This is the first book, Nightfall by Daniel Barnett. And this, I've only read the first in the series, but it does have, I think, 6 books. But if you like horror, this is like this creeping dread kind of horror where one day the sun just goes out and all the light disappears from the world. And it follows what would happen to people if that happened. So I made the poor choice of finishing this at 2 a.m. Please don't do that. I was praying for the sun to come up the next day. So just be aware. So that one. And then I would also recommend, which is right behind me. Look at me banging on all cylinders now. I've got the Gunmetal Gods series by Zalma Akhtar, which I know Chris knew I was going to mention because I adore this series. It is a Middle Eastern grimdark world mixed with cosmic horror. So again, if you like horror, this will have elements that you like. And the cosmic horror ramps up each one. I have an arc above my head here of Elder Ebook, which is now out. I was just lucky enough to get an arc from Zamil, but that one gave me nightmares. It's like it really ramps up the horror aspect. But if you like grimdark, and also I guess Game of Thrones is another one. This is very Game of Thronesy in its backstabbiness and its grittiness. So highly recommend this one. I think that was all that I had for horror. Yeah, I think I say to myself.
I was going to ask, is the political one that you mentioned where the protagonist is somebody who's awful, is it a spoiler if you reveal whether you were rooting against them the whole time? Or do you feel like do you read and you're like, I hate this person?
I don't think it's a spoiler to say that I'm 4 books in at this point. The 4th book just got released and it's going to be on my shelf soon. That his name is Othrin, the prince. He is one of the most in-depth, complicated, frustrating characters I've ever read from, because I will hate him in one chapter and then in the next chapter be like, yeah, and all of it makes sense for his character. All of it, like none of it is outside of what he would do, but he's so contradictory in and of himself that it's a roller coaster.
I didn't know if it was I'm totally Prince of Thorns, if either of you know of that, by Mark Lawrence, where the main character, when you first start, you're like, this is the most despicable person. And it's hard to care about them. And there are some things that get revealed throughout the book, so I don't want to say too much. But that was hard to even keep going after the opening of that book. So I didn't know if it was like that, where you're like, I hate this person immediately. kind
I
of
think
conflicted
you would-
feelings.
It's conflicted, but in the beginning, I would say rather than hate, you might feel disdain for this character. Yeah, and he does some things that might, definitely make you feel a bit of hatred. But I do think that because we're from his POV, and Stuart writes with such a nuanced voice, that you do start to see reasons to not close the book early enough that you would stick with him. So I think, it's safe to say that you won't hate him all the way through.
Have either of you watched the Netflix Castlevania show?
No.
Oh,
I
because
haven't.
Dracula is kind of like your big bad of because there's Castlevania Nocturne and then there's the original Castlevania, and Dracula is basically unleashing a horde of vampires onto the world to get revenge. And you're like, oh, that's awful. But then you see what happened and you're like, I feel kind of bad for him though. And then he's sometimes really cool and you're like, oh, he's kind of awesome, but you're also killing a lot of people right now. So when you were talking about how you go back and forth, where on one hand you're like, come on. And then you're like, yeah, that's sort of, I feel like you almost feel guilty when you are kind of excited about something with the character. That makes me more interested in the book, I think, is to hear the complexity there.
Oh, yes. I think what you just described with Dracula would map very well onto Othran for sure. And I just realized that I was remiss when I talked about political fantasy, because I had another one I wanted to recommend, which is an all-time favorite of mine. So we're going to go back to that, circle back just for a second. And I know Chris knows I'm going to mention this one. This is no surprise, but this is Legacy of the Brightwash by Crystal Matar. Guys, this book, it's so incredibly good. If you can't tell by how many tabs are in this thing.
Do you mind saying the title again? It's just a little blurry.
Oh, sure. Yep. Legacy of the Brightwash.
Brightwash. Okay.
I will say, I am someone. Sorry, Taylor. I'm someone who does not emote very often. This book made me cry.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was that good. Also, fantastic audiobook.
Oh, yeah. Drowned Kingdom has an audiobook too, for those listening.
This is the
cover
for. I could kind of gather the image, but just in case the quality when this is officially up, I want to make sure people can see it. Man, saying that something made someone cry that doesn't normally cry is such a good sell.
I bawled my eyes out reading this book. I'm not a crier either. I was a mess.
But you said it's political fantasy?
It is. It's a lot of things, which is why I had a hard time deciding what genre to actually recommend this with, which is why I think I missed it. When look at that. Perfect. So this is
except for I spelled indie wrong. not perfect.
Close enough. It's a mashup of, I would recommend political fantasy just because the second book gets a bit more political, A Legacy of Brick and Bone, which is why I would recommend it in that vein. But this first book has, if you're a romance lover, there's romance in here for you. If you are a grimdark lover, the world is as grimdarky as grimdark gets. It's also got a kind of a gas lamp feel to it. But basically, we follow our main character, Tashue, who is, I always say, for lack of a better word, a cop, because it's not an exact transition over, but an enforcer in his world. And his job is to control the tainted or the talented, depending on who you talk to, which word you would use, of people whose magic has quickened or has developed enough to be shown to the world. And those people are basically put in indentured servitude by the government. And they're the reason that the trains run the way they do. So magic is a basis for this world. And so his job is to reinforce the status quo, kind of in that way. And then one day, a young girl washes up on the shores of the Brightwash with her arms and her legs cut off. And he is determined to find out what happened to this little girl. But no one else seems to really care. And through starting that journey, a lot happens. And it is so powerfully written. The sense of place is it just jumps off the page. I just, this book has not left me since I read it. So I scream about it all the time. So it's why Chris knew it was coming.
I feel like
seems
just to add on the legacy of the Brainwash praise, I'm also not a character-driven reader. I'm very much a plot and world-building driven reader. The characters in this book will bury themselves in your soul. Like, you cannot help but want to know everything about every single one of them. And it's such a beautiful look at the human condition and our response to trauma. So, if you've gone through something quite heavy in your life, I would say, be ready for that going through. But it's such a powerful message of what you do with that energy and whether you use that to continue on and fuel your life in a positive way, or it can go the other way. And it's a really interesting discussion between those two things.
you both sold that so well. It's all
fantastic.
of them, certainly, but that one in particular, this is, I feel like, turned into a gush review for that. And it's interesting that you talked about.
You shouldn't be surprised with the two of us.
It is interesting that you were describing that it's such a mashup, and you were talking about certain genres, and then you started talking about how they're investigating what happened to this girl. So in the sense, is it almost a mystery component to, like, a detective? So yeah, it really is just a little bit of everything.
Yep, there's a whodunit for sure. But the whodunit has a larger connection, which I think is what solidifies it very well in the fantasy genre. It's not just about that, but that's definitely a factor, a big one.
There's also like a little bit of spice, because I listened to a scene at the gym and I had to check that no one was around me at that point, because it was very embarrassing for me.
That's why I said romance readers might like it. Yeah, there's some well-written spice in there too.
That sounds like something a lot of people are gonna like.
Yep.
I still remember, Chris, when is the book called a Taste of Golden Iron? Is that what it's called? Am I getting the title right?
It is.
I still need to read it. And I remember there was 2 different covers, and I was like, "Oh, I like the one." And you're like, "No, the other one," because the one that has the characters on it. So I still need to read that.
Another
one,
book I
really
did not think I would enjoy, but I loved it. Mainly because I am Evermere. Like, I am so one of the characters. I was like, oh, they've written me. That's rude.
Did you get any compensation for it, or?
No, I did not.
Right. Write a letter.
So I'm not going to put up any prompts. Just in general, what are some that you want to recommend? And you kind of want to not have to have any kind of perimeter as to how it fits into something. And either of you can.
Chris can go first.
I'm trying to think of like the best genre mashups, because that's a really fun thing about indie, is that you can just mix and mash whatever you want. So for me, I was going to hold up Gunmetal Gods for this one, which I've recently reread for a discussion, because I didn't enjoy it the first time around, but I listened to it the first time around. So I picked it up physically the second time, and this is after reading 7 books of Malazan. I was like, okay, I now understand this book a lot more now that I've got, the ability to keep 3,000 characters in my head over the space of the other series. And it's just super complex. And the mashup of the Middle Eastern setting is like so cool in this book. I still do not care about one of the characters at all. Micah, every chapter he was in, I was like, I don't care. But Keva, I really did. So this is an awesome genre mashup of that horror, such an interesting Middle Eastern fantasy world, as well as the complex characters that really build over time. One that I don't hear get talked about all that much is one that's a low fantasy world with an inspiration of Sherlock Holmes, and that is going to be Dream of Death City by PJ Nwosu. So PJ Nwosu has written a dark murder mystery. This world is probably one of the darkest that I've been in a fictional setting. And that ring light is going to be so glary on it, the cover, because it's gloss. But if you like a murder mystery with low magic and a dark world and very, very complex sort of character work, they're all sort of discovering themselves through this dark world and through this trauma, then it's a really fun mashup. Not for the people in the book, but for me reading it, it was like... the last one I'll recommend is probably one that people wouldn't think that I would recommend, but her prose is so beautiful, and this is going to be a switch of pace, and that's going to be a romantasy book that my wife Rachel actually edited. So, and I alpha read this one, but her prose is fantastic, and it's called The Briar Crown by Helen Rigg Pedersen. This is a slow burn romance, but what I find with Helen's writing is she can't help but bring a story to it. So the romantasy, it's not just fluff. There is a lot happening with these characters. They're all quite strong and compelling, and there's a hot tub scene that I needed to put down. So, there's that.
So, do you want, for anybody that doesn't know, do you want to mention the difference between beta and alpha reading?
Yeah. So alpha reading is it's a relatively unedited manuscript. It's essentially a draft from an author that has come through, who's looking for a little bit of, I guess, guidance from an overview point of view. I would attribute it to like dev editing or structural editing, but except without the qualification. So before it goes to that point. Whereas a beta read is something that's a little bit more polished. Generally, it would have gone through a stage of editing, and it's before it goes through to maybe a copy editor for that, or a proofreader for that final edit, and then it will go through to ARCs. So there's still time for the author to make changes at the beta stage, but it is more polished than an alpha.
That's so cool. I
Taylor,
never knew that you officially are making, a space to do that. I love that for you, truly. But for me, I have a couple. These two don't really need to have a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A recommendation attached to it. But I do think it would be good to say, if you like YA, if you're coming from the YA space, or you're used to like having that one female protagonist that you follow a lot, these two I would recommend, but they're definitely not YA. Like they have more adult themes and content in them. But this series is The War Eternal by Rob J. Hayes, starting with Along the Razor's Edge. It's so good. It is a 5-book series. The first 3 books follow one arc, and then the second 2 books follow another. But we follow Eskara Helsing as she's a magician. She can handle magic in her world, but she was trained from a very young age. So she's basically well, I wouldn't say a child soldier, but similar to that. She's been trained since she was very young to only do this with her life. And she enters the war that she's been trained for, and then her side loses. And she gets captured and put into the deepest, darkest pits of their underground prison. And we start the book there. And her in the pit is the name of the prison. And it's you could not predict where this book goes. You can try with all of your might, but there's no way that you'll be able to guess where this series goes. And that was one of the funnest parts for me. I also think Hayes completely stuck the landing. The reason that I say, if you're coming from YA and you kind of like that strong female point of view, that's the only connection I would really make to this. But I make it because Eska has the loudest narrative voice. You will know from page 1 if you're like, I click with this or I don't. So, if you read a sample of it, you'll be able to tell. But she colors the story with her voice in the best way possible. So I highly recommend this series. And then the other one that I would recommend YA adjacent for the very same reason would be Petition, which is another SPIFBO 9 semifinalist. This one, yes, love that book so much. This one takes the idea of a magic school and then says, okay, the magic school's over. Now that person needs to find a job. And so
that sounds so good.
Yes. So it's that after she's graduated, our main character, her parents are immigrants. And so there's a lot weighing on her getting a job, and she's trying to do so. So it's a fantastic, fast-paced book. Highly, highly recommend. And then the last one that I would say is a short story collection for people who like sci-fi and fantasy as well. But that's Skybreaker. It's an anthology of short stories. I believe Skybreaker is 2 words. It's hard. It's one of those hidden gems, so I think it doesn't come up very easily. The cover is red. It's got like a silhouette on it. I can pull it up on my Goodreads as well. If I need to.
I think I might have found it. We'll
Okay.
find out.
Yeah.
Is it this one?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is an anthology, so there are a lot of authors associated with it, but a lot of them are heavy hitters in the indie world. And this is so interesting because it follows a concept that everyone had the same concept, but was able to write a story in the way that they wanted to with that concept. And it's the idea that there's this thing called the Wanderer that has specific properties you had to include, but then you could go wild with any other aspect. And this Wanderer goes to different worlds. And it's not evil, but it doesn't have the best intentions in mind for the places that it goes. And people took that concept and wrote what effect that might have in the world that they chose to create. It's so good. Some of the stories are extremely grimdark. Some of them a little less so. But it's one of the best anthologies I've ever read. One of the only 5-star anthologies I've ever read. And I highly recommend it. I don't think it gets enough attention.
Anthologies can be really tricky. The idea of there being this kind of almost prompt is cool. It's an interesting way to approach it.
I
Chris,
think that's why. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think that's why it was 5 stars for me, because there was this through line for everything. So the stories were all disparate and different, but there was this one thing that you knew was going to be in there. So you were like looking for it, waiting for it to show up. It worked really, really well.
It's almost like when this is probably a not great example, but it's like when you go to reread something, and since you know what's coming, then all the things jump out at you and you can kind of appreciate, you look for it. So it's kind of sounds like there's that going for it, where you're like, okay, I know this is going to come into the picture. When is this going to come into the picture, though? Like almost a level of suspense, or at least excitement, maybe is a better way to put it.
Perfect way to put it.
Chris, did you have more indie genre mashups that you wanted to mention, or were there specific, like if you like this show, if you like this subgenre?
all the things. The prompt that I think it was one of your prompts that I would like to get to, if that's okay, is the accessibility prompt. Is the books that might take a little bit more to get into, but they're totally worth it. I wanted to turn this on its head a little bit and say books that grow with the reader, or series that grow with the reader. They start off super accessible, but they get more complex within the book and gives that learning curve to people, which I think is something that some of the slower burn indie books does really well. So I've got 3 for this one, if that's okay, if I can just go for it. And the first is going to be the first story arc of The Aspect by Mark Holloway. So now, we don't really talk about this series because of the author, but if you liked Harry Potter, this is better. So it starts with a magic school setting, very dark. I think his name is Kellen. He gets ripped from his life and he has to learn to control the Aspect, which is a spirit-based magic system. And he can use it quite well. This book, super accessible, very easy to read. It gets more complex as it goes on. So if you're looking at something to introduce you to the world, this is very character focused. We get the slow burn sort of school setting. He's learning. At the end of this book, it turns dark and the next book becomes very plot heavy. The last book, called Chaos Risen, really experiments with body horror and the consequences of actions, and it is just, if you're squeamish, don't worry, it's not that bad, but I won't give anything away. But it's just fantastic. And I thought the experimentation of the series that let the reader sort of grow with it was awesome. The next one, and I did want Elle prior to this, would be her book, Peace and Turmoil. So Peace and Turmoil, I said this in a review I did a while ago. it has a very complicated political setting, which allows the reader to grow with it. But it's coupled so well with a whimsical magic system and also the fiends. So the reader really gets a feel for the world and the creatures that are in it, except for that wolf that turns itself inside out, because that gave me nightmares. Thank you for that. But then the political climate gets more complicated as the story goes on, but it gives you that time to sit with the story and the characters as it grows. And I thought it was really, really well done in this book, and I enjoyed it. And the last one is going to be maybe the slowest burn I've ever read that is well worth it. And that's going to be Heliotrope by Palmer Pickering. This is very much a found family classic sword and sorcery story that you start with the farm boy, and you basically go through this quest, this life with them, and you go through every stage. You sit down to dinner with them, you go through the training sequences, but it's so captivating. The start of this book has one of the most beautiful scenes I've ever read, and that is the creation of a mosaic pear tree. And it is so, like, my jaw was dropping, and I just didn't put it down. It was such a slow burn that just captivated me the entire way. But again, it helps the reader grow with the story. So accessible, but you grow with it.
Will you say the title of that one again? It's just written a little small.
Yeah. Heliotrope.
Okay. Nice.
Heliotrope is also in Spiffbo, I believe.
Yeah, also a good audiobook if you're an audio consumer.
Yay. Did you have one or any that you wanted to add, Taylor, for the accessibility factor? Either maybe they're really easy to get into or not as much, but you think it's worth it?
Yeah. I would say I have one of each. Both are from Spiffbo. Excuse me. One of them is hard to get into in that it's for a very specific type of reader. So this is one of those books that I read it and I bounced off it, but I can see why a lot of people would connect with it. And it was actually the finalist for my Spiffbo group, which is why we have so many people, right? Because I bounced off, but a lot of people didn't. And that is Cold West by Clayton Snyder. That book is short, but it packs a gigantic gut punch. It is, just trigger warning before you go in about violence. It is very violent. So just be ready for that. And it never stops to breathe. So I think it could be hard to get into because it's unapologetically what it is. And that what it is really matches for some people. And it's not a large page count. So if you wanted to see if that would be for you, you could definitely check it out. It deals with generational trauma, having to return to a world that you thought that you left. So it's a very dark Western, which I had never even really delved into Westerns before. So a little bit hard to get into, but if it's your thing, I think it's very much going to be your thing.
What was that one called again?
Cold West.
Cold West. Okay.
By Clayton Snyder. Yep. I can pull up the cover. It has a couple different covers. This is the one on Goodreads, but a different one might come up.
Yeah, when I was typing it in, a different one.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. But yeah, so that one could be your thing, could not be your thing, but it'll be one of those. I don't think it'll be in the middle. Yeah, that's the same book. Yep. Yeah, and I believe it does have an audio, I think. Well, let me not go on record saying that.
It may or may not.
It may or may not. That's for you to find out, dear watchers. So that one for the maybe difficult to get into. And then for accessibility, super easy to become interested in would be the Wickwire Watch. Also a finalist. That one has a young, plucky teenage boy as the main character. So he's very easy to find sympathy for right away, to be interested in what he's doing. And I think that there's, yes, Wickwarath, that's it. It has a little bit of a mystery aspect to it, but I think the best part of it is, and this is what drew me in, there's a flying city. And it's one of those books where you spend a lot of time with the characters, let's put it that way. A lot of downtime, which I love. And I think a lot of people who like epic fantasy love as well. Kind of like the way Chris mentioned Heliotrope does that. But the place in which they do that is different. I don't know. I think that one's really easy to get into. I couldn't put it down once I started reading it. So, highly recommend.
I
do love a
definitely.
flying city.
Why am I such a sucker for flying cities, like flying pirate ships? I don't know why.
Just get me in the air. We're good.
Things that fly. Get me away from everybody else.
Right.
Were there any last ones? Because you've both given so many recommendations, and I think ranging from a lot of different areas. But were there any? Are you looking like I have so many more?
No.
Yeah. You can
You can take it away, Chris. I'm good. So
there's books everywhere in this house right now. I just want to circle back to maybe a classic fantasy, since a lot of people do get into the big series. So like a Wheel of Time, a lot of people tend to find fantasy through Wheel of Time. Now, personally, I can't stand Rand, but I liked the world building of Wheel of Time. And also a name that's sort of coming up again at the moment because of the release of the final book in the series is Janny Wirtz, and that with her Wars of Light and Shadow series. So the book that I have here is sort of a love child between the two, and that is going to be Blood of the Spear by Mark Timoney. So if you are someone who has jumped into fantasy and really enjoys that sort of world building esque, Mark Timoney's a world building guy as well. So there's a lot of focus on the world here. And like I've got a video game recommendation for this as well, which is Fable. If you like the Fable series, you'll probably enjoy this book. I think I've talked about it about 3,000 times on the channel. I may be biased. Mark is one of my very good friends, but I just think that it's one of those books that if you're into that very classic fantasy style, you'll enjoy that. And I too love political fantasy. The more complex, the better. I really enjoy it. So I do have a recommendation based on that, and then I'll shut up, I promise. And that is going to be one of my favorite author discoveries of last year, which is M.T. Fontaine, and this is called Carved Amidst the Shadows. Very dark. Basically, if you're marked, you cannot move across borders. If you basically get you're unalived. You just disintegrate if you try to cross the border and you're marked with a certain brand. People who want to travel across need to either remove their limb or somehow remove that mark. So this has got a royal setting. A young girl, something happens to her. It's got a bit of enemies to lovers, which generally I don't like, but I was so invested in this particular storyline. And I just think she's super underrated as an author. So if you like political fantasy, this definitely has that elements, and like Rebels as a character you love to hate in here who has humanizing moments. I'm going to throw out the word, what was the villain from Arcane? It gives me very Silco vibes.
Silco.
Yeah, it gives me Silco vibes. So that sort of in that vein.
It was already sold, but if you're going to compare it in any fashion to Arcane, especially Silco, that's such a great villain.
One of the best written villains that I've ever come across.
Yeah. It's bizarre that it wasn't it wasn't a character from previously that they were pulling from. They completely crafted it for that, which they did a great job with. Anyway, I don't need this to turn into an Arcane gush. Taylor, were there any last ones that you wanted to recommend, or you think you've kind of gone through a lot of yours?
I think I've gone through most of the ones that I wanted to mention. Of course, I'm going to think of one as soon as we get off air, but I'm pretty sure that I've hit last one. I just saw it behind me. Last one. Last one. This is also Spiffo 8, I believe. It's also Spiffo. Song for the Void. It was a finalist. This is also for cosmic horror people. Clearly, I'm one of those. This book follows a doctor who is on a war ship, speaking of ships, in the middle of the Opium Wars. And there is a something that appears in the sky, and people on the ship start kind of losing it a little bit. And it's told from his perspective. So it's like the unreliable narrator aspect of it. Is he seeing things actually as they are, or is it unreliable? And this book really deals with the theme of addiction, how to navigate through it, how different people navigate through it. Can it be worked through, that kind of thing. And the ending of this was fantastic. I also do want to mention, though, that there's graphic violence in this as well. So just be aware going in if that's something that you would want to read. But the writing is beautiful. The intro, the prologue to this book sold me right away. So it's got gorgeous prose to go along with that theme, that story. But I would highly recommend this one. I don't think I see enough people talk about it either. But yeah, it is. Just be aware what you're getting into when you go into it. It's heavier. But that would be my last one. Promise, hands
Ending
up.
on a really dark note.
Yes, very much so.
Not that I would know, but from what you're describing, it sounds like it would be a lot.
Oh, it is. It's dark. Yeah.
Some of the things, the way that both of you have described them, I'm like, can there be a movie or a show? And I haven't even read them yet, but so many of them I already am really excited about. Thank you so much to both of you. Like I said, this is selfishly just me being like, give me recommendations. But I know that so many people are going to appreciate this because of what you were talking about at the beginning. A lot of people just don't know where to start. It's sort of there's so much out there. So navigating the self-published landscape can be a little daunting. And I think both of you have made it so much easier. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people that get a lot of recommendations as a result of this. So thank you so much. Obviously, I'll have both your channels linked down below. So if people want even more recommendations, and just the whole time I was sitting here, it's not just the recommendations, just the way both of you talk about books. It makes me excited about books, if that makes any sense. Because I mean, that's the big reason why so many people love BookTube and the book community. And I don't know, just hearing your passion for books, even though I hear it all the time, it's just really exciting. So thank you so much. This was so fun. And both of them are not anywhere near where I am. So big thank you to them for managing to fit this into their schedule. I really appreciate it. It was easy for me. It was a Sunday evening for me, but both of you had to do stuff on a Monday morning. So I'm so sorry, but thank you for that.
Thank you for having us.
Not at all. Yeah, I really appreciate you having us. And the timing wasn't a problem at all. I'm used to doing that. When you have a weird time zone, it is what it is.
Yeah, like Patrick, I'm sure a lot of people know him being in Indonesia. He's always like 11 p.m. midnight. That's fine. That works really well for me. I'm like, are you sure? And he's like, I'm up anyway. So it's often super late. But yeah, anyway, thanks so much to the both of you. This was lovely. And thanks so much for all our recommendations. And for anybody that ends up watching this, I'll try to have all of the books that were talked about in the description so that if you want to reference back to it, you can. And because I know even for me, I'm like, ooh, I want to remember that one very specifically. And I'm sure I don't remember any of them at this point. So we'll have all of that to reference back to. But thank you again. And we'll see you all later. Bye.
Bye.